Wait, how does this work?
You just press the button.
This one?
No, not that one.
You're listening to Press the Button, a Ploughshares Fund podcast dedicated to all things nuclear.
I'm joined now by Tom Kalina, Director of Policy.
Joe Cirincione, President of the Ploughshares Fund.
Philip Yoon, the Executive Director of the Ploughshares Fund.
Development Director from Ploughshares Fund, Elizabeth Warner.
And here's your host, Joe Cirincione.
Thank you, Del, and thank you for listening to Press the Button. I'm excited about today's episode. We have an interview with Leah Greenberg, one of the co-founders of Indivisible, who was just named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in America. She sits down with us to talk about her organization and her overview of what's happening in America today. But first, we're going to start with early warning. This is our weekly 7-minute synopsis of the news we're following, and we think you should be too. We take 7 minutes because if the president is notified of a nuclear attack, that is the maximum amount of time the president has to decide whether to press the button, whether to launch our nuclear weapons, even though they may not know if the warning of an attack is actually real. The clock is ticking. Let's go.
And now, early warning, early warning, early warning, early warning. A 7-minute synopsis of this week's nuclear news.
I'm joined today in the glass-enclosed Washington, D.C. headquarters by Michelle Dover, Ploughshares Fund Program Director, and John Carl Baker, the impressively titled Ploughshares Fund Nuclear Field Coordinator and Senior Program Officer. Thank you very much for joining us. Michelle, what are you watching today?
Well, I think to start off over the weekend, we heard the very sad news that Richard Lugar, the longest-serving U.S. Senator in Indiana's history, died at the age of 87 after a short illness. He was a incredible giant in our field, a champion of non-proliferation, and one of the founders of the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. And he, is best known for working with Democrat Senator Sam Nunn to pass legislation in December of 91, 4 days after the first steps were taken to dissolve the USSR, to put forward this new model of cooperation to lock down Russia's loose nukes.
I was working on the House Armed Services Committee staff, and it was one of the privileges of my life to work with Richard Lugar and Sam Nunn in this pioneer effort. We had never done anything like this. They invented it, and we're lucky that they did.
Well, and I think that point about inventing it, you'll read a lot in the articles and statements that people are putting out about how much they affected the field. But I think what we forget is that it's easy to look back and look at that history and think that peace and cooperation was preordained. Mm-hmm. It wasn't. The first version of this bill died in a nasty fight right before then.
Right, the Bush administration resisted it at first.
Exactly, and Senator Lugar stepping in to work with Nunn to pass it in a very short succession after that first bill's failure is a testament to his leadership and vision.
Yes, he's a national hero. The world is safer because Richard Lugar did what he did. Thank you. John Carl.
Well, I'm taking a look at a story from Newsweek and some other places as well about how Russia has responded to Trump's offer to open up arms control talks with them and also with China. If you recall, at the end of last week, the Trump administration is apparently seeking to begin arms control talks with these two countries. But it's unclear whether they're willing to actually extend the New START agreement as part or as a preliminary part of these talks. But Russia has actually responded, and they seem to be inclined to speak with the Trump administration. I think they're cautiously optimistic. But it's going to remain to be seen whether the Trump administration is really doing this in all seriousness. I think we've heard these sort of claims from them before, that they're seeking better deals, that they think there are flaws with the deals that exist and they want to negotiate new ones, and really just using that as an excuse to get rid of the ones that exist. Mm-hmm. So the devil's going to be in the details here, and it'll be interesting to see whether the Trump administration decides to extend New START or not.
Let me ask you about this. The Washington Post reported today that Donald Trump passed a milestone. He told his 10,000th lie since assuming office, and the pace has picked up. I actually saw that story and thought they're lying, that this is not serious, that they're holding out this false goal of a better arms control regime that you can't get to, a unicorn for arms control. So what do you think when you read this, when you talk to people about it? What's your take?
I'm inclined to agree with you. I cannot imagine that this is an initiative that's being made in good faith. This is very, very close to what they've done with the Iran deal. It's very, very close to what they did with the INF withdrawal. In pursuit of a better agreement, they're
North
just
Korea.
ditching everything else. Yes, North Korea as well, right?
But they hold out this ideal agreement in order to be able to plausibly reject the agreement they actually could get.
Yeah, it's a very disturbing pattern, and I hope it does not continue.
Thank you very much. Michelle.
Well, continuing this question of agreements with other countries, the story I'm looking at is the news from Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, who told Iran's state broadcasting company that Iran is considering it could withdraw from either the Iran deal and or the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So,
withdraw, pull out completely.
Pull out completely, or, I think there's what they were trying.
Presumably that means in order to go pursue nuclear weapons.
It's what people are wanting to know. This is following the U.S.'s announcement that it will not renew the so-called oil waivers to allow other countries to buy Iran's oil, leaving Iran in a situation where it is adhering to an agreement where it is receiving diminishing positive benefits. And so, Iran has threatened in the past to take steps like this.
Right. They're in the position where they're conforming to the deal. So they're not pursuing their nuclear program. It's rolled back, frozen under inspection, but they're not getting the economic benefits that were promised. So it's a one-sided deal from their point of view. And is this real, or is this just a negotiating ploy?
Well, this is the question. Since they have threatened this in the past, I think the way experts are interpreting it right now is that it is likely, a statement to pressure the European Union and others to do more. To bring about those benefits and to express frustration at this one-sided deal. I think what we might be looking at is more of, will they bend the terms of the Iran deal rather than full-out withdrawal? But these are all questions we'll be watching closely.
Great. We're running out of time. The missiles are coming, or maybe not coming. John Call, what have you got?
I just have a follow-on story from what Michelle was just talking about, which is that Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, has now said that he will visit North Korea sometime in the near future, which is a pretty good warning to issue, since North Korea is kind of like the prime example of what happens when you don't negotiate an agreement or an agreement falls apart. And one country decides to develop nuclear missiles or nuclear weapons. So Zarif's move must be tied to his, flirtation that he's making with potentially leaving the deal.
Yeah, there's been a lot of stories, rumors, speculation about North Korean and Iranian cooperation on nuclear technology. Is there, and is this a demonstration that those stories are true?
To my knowledge, those stories are not accurate, certainly not in the way that they're reported. I think this is more of a public relations move. He's very publicly saying, I'm going to go check out this other nuclear power, see how they're doing, and use that to get some leverage in his negotiations.
Right. This is the other road. You don't like the road we're on? Well, this is the way we could go. Pay attention.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Michelle, what are you reading? What are you going to be doing this week in your research?
So there is a new report out by the UN Institute for Disarmament Research.
We're supposed to be excited about this?
I am. So in side news, there is a big meeting related to the non-proliferation treaty that's happening this week. And so UNIDIR has put out a new report on gender from its Gender and Disarmament Program. Very exciting. Follow-up to its 2016 report.
And John Call, quick, we're almost out of time.
There's a great reprint in the National Interest today that's from a War is Boring story from a few years back about when the United States actually had real nuclear war tests. They put off actual atomic bombs and put their own soldiers in danger to test what the effect on the soldiers would be. It's worth checking out.
Well, we're out of time. That's it. I wanted to go more into that, but we can't. Thank you for your early warning, Michelle and John Call. I'm delighted to be here with Leah Greenberg, who's a leader and one of the founders of the Indivisible project, a movement of thousands of group leaders and more than 1 million members fighting for progressive policies at every level of government. Leah and her husband, Ezra, were just named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in America. Congratulations, Leah, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, and happy to be here.
I want to talk about the Time Magazine honor.
Sure.
But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about Indivisible?
Absolutely. Well, Indivisible started shortly after the 2016 presidential election. My background personally, I'm a former congressional staffer, as is my husband, Ezra. And shortly after Donald Trump won the election, we were seeing this massive wave of people all over the country who were having a really intense reaction and who were desperately looking for something that they could do to respond, to limit the damage that this administration was going to do to protect democracy. And as former congressional staffers, we felt like we had a whole set of lessons from our time on the Hill in terms of what regular people all over the country can do to influence Congress, to make their members of Congress listen, because we'd actually seen it all in action when we had been in Congress, when we had faced the Tea Party. And so our contribution was to write a short 23-page guide to civic engagement called Indivisible, a practical guide to resisting the Trump agenda, which advised people to form local groups all over the country in order to pressure their elected officials.
I actually remember when that went up and read it, and I thought this was terrific organizing advice. But the really fascinating thing is what happened next.
Right. Within literally a couple of hours of putting the document online, we had people from all over the country who were emailing us and letting us know that they were forming what they shortly started to call Indivisible groups, dedicated to putting the guide into action. And so in a matter of months, we were found ourselves in the middle of this incredible decentralized organic movement of thousands of local groups all over the country dedicated to resisting Trump and fighting for progressive policies. And so we realized we couldn't just put the guide online and walk away. We ended up forming an organization with the focus.
Just to be clear, you didn't intend to form a group. You figured, here's my advice,
That's right. Yeah, we thought that like our friends would read it and that they would give it to their families over Christmas break, and that in 6 months somebody would email us and say, hey, I really liked your guide and I used it at a town hall, and we would be really excited about that.
So how big are you?
So we now have 70 staff.
I'm sorry, 70?
70 staff. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Mostly here in Washington?
About half here in Washington and half based in turf all over the country.
Okay.
So we focus on supporting this decentralized movement through coordination, through support, through services, and through policy analysis so that people can be most effective in making their voices heard here in D.C. and on a state level.
And full disclosure, Ploughshares Fund is one of the supporters of Indivisible. We gave you a grant to help you hire a national security staffer, Elizabeth Beavers.
That's right.
So you've got all these members. Give us some examples of what you've been doing recently, I guess. How does this work?
Sure. Well, so as the national node in a very large decentralized network, what we do is some combination of providing support for local leaders, so things like liability insurance for your meetings, or access to a fundraising support service so that they can raise money and spend money without actually having to register as formal organizations. Stuff designed to help support a decentralized grassroots movement of people who are doing this in their spare time and don't want to deal with details like that. And then we also provide coordination and guidance and strategy for national and some state initiatives. So, for example, over the course of the legislative session, over the course of the new Congress, we've done a series of pushes on, keeping Democrats supported during the shutdown, and really pushing to prevent Donald Trump from getting what he was seeking out of that, which was major new funding for the immigration enforcement bureaucracy or his wall. We've done a major push for H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which is focused on a whole suite of different issues facing our democracy, and we've done a major push around the upcoming budget resolution as well.
And this is a Democratic, capital D, Democratic effort?
So it focuses on both. So we have groups in every single congressional district. So they are talking to both Republicans and Democrats. But we think that an important part of this is both advocating to your Republicans and supporting your Democrats when they're doing the right thing.
And do you support candidates directly?
We do support candidates directly. So we actually, this year, or in 2018, we launched an endorsement process, which was focused on elevating candidates who were catching fire with the grassroots nationwide. And so local Indivisible groups could nominate candidates that they were supporting for a national endorsement. We vetted and screened them.
You know, I noticed this when I personally give contributions during the campaign season, and I would always look for Indivisible's stamp of approval, your support, your recommendation for them. Is there a Republican counterpart to you? Is there something that's going on now that's like you, but on the Republican side?
I don't know of anything that's quite like us. I think that the closest parallels are probably the organizations that sprouted up in relation to the Tea Party back in the early 2000s, or 2010. 2011. Those are, folks like Americans for Prosperity, Freedom Works, who also had kind of a general mission of supporting a decentralized, locally led grassroots. They were a lot better funded, and they had specific...
they got billionaire funding for some of those, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of Koch brothers money behind some of this.
And they took a different arc strategically, which was really they basically flooded the grassroots with money. They sent speakers out to everyone's local meetings to try and promote greater ideological alignment. They really pushed people from sort of an originally relatively non-ideological frame into a very clear sort of Koch brothers frame.
Right, and the progressive wing, the progressive side of the American experience was caught completely flat-footed.
Exactly.
There was nothing like that on the progressive side, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Obama had his Organizing for America, basically the grassroots campaign that had won him the presidency. He just disbanded that, or kept it as a sort of a once in a while email operation.
Yeah, it was it's a real tragedy, honestly, because Organizing for America was sort of partially integrated with the Democratic Party, but it was both not closely enough integrated for it to really become part of the party, and also not independent enough to continue to serve as a real meaningful grassroots power operation.
Right. In 2009, there's 1.5 million people celebrating his inauguration on the Mall, and then they all went home. And they thought it's done.
Yep.
But the other side didn't go home.
No.
And so this is the lesson you've learned. So you're in this for the long haul.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we think a lot about, how do we get Trump out of office in 2020, but also how do we build the coalition that's still around to push for the kinds of reforms that we need in 2021? Because what Democrats really were missing in 2008 was, in 2009, was an amped up grassroots that was really having their back as they were debating these big policies that they were trying to move.
So your recommendations matter to me. Do they matter to candidates? Do they matter to members? What kind of reaction are you getting?
Look, so it's really not necessarily about our relationship with a candidate or a member. It's about a local group's relationship. And so we see everything across the spectrum. We have a lot of members of Congress who form very tight relationships with local Indivisible groups, who really take their policy preferences and their advocacy very seriously. We have a lot of Republicans who are doing their best to avoid ever being in contact with their local Indivisible group. And groups
you
who
mean
are
not having town halls?
Not having town halls, not doing any kind of public meetings. Closing their offices whenever they can, et cetera.
Yeah. So most of the issues you work on are domestic issues, justice, economic inequity issues. How do defense and foreign policy play in your organization and at the local chapter level?
Well, we've seen a lot of concern about, the implications of a Trump administration for global foreign policy. Both, sort of the fact that in the same way that he is rapidly degrading the democratic norms within the U.S., he is rapidly degrading the global norms as well. But also, the potential for a kind of major foreign policy crisis. So often what I hear from people around the country who are worried about this is, the phrase, he's got his finger on the nuclear button.
Yes.
Very, very common sort of way of understanding the concern that, this wildly unsuitable person now has the power of life and death over billions of people. And so I think that what we've always been trying to be ready for is sort of the moment when there is a major foreign policy crisis. We recognize that this isn't necessarily the first thing that people come to activism over,
right.
but we often see a real interest in, in peace, and particularly in averting the kind of destructive conflicts that we had under the last Republican administration.
So have there been any defense or foreign policy issues that you've actually mobilized around?
Absolutely.
for example?
Yeah, so we were very active in supporting the Yemen resolution, which was
Yes.
focused on checking the president's war powers as it relates to the U.S.'s involvement in the Yemen conflict. That has been, something that we both had really enthusiastic grassroots response around, and real leadership from the Democrats around.
Yes. This is the way I see these issues playing out on a nationwide scale. It's mainly questions of war and peace, and the American public is tired of these forever wars. And so when Bernie Sanders in the Senate started championing this resolution to basically it was saying that we will no longer support Saudi Arabia in their war in Yemen. We're going to cut off U.S. support. It passed the Senate. Ro Khanna was the leader in the House side. That passed. Republicans voted for it in both bodies. The president just vetoed it. Where do you think this is going?
Well, I mean, I think that unless we can get together the votes to overcome or to get a veto-proof majority, which seems unlikely based on where we are, I think that this will stand as both a meaningful effort by Congress to reclaim its war powers and also...
First time the Congress has ever used the 1973 War Powers Act.
Right. And also, it doesn't look like the votes are there to actually force the executive branch to make the change. And so I think that it's one more piece of the broader argument that this is an administration that's out of control, that refuses to accede to the limits imposed by Congress, that is, that needs to be checked by the voters if Congress won't do it. And so I think it goes into the broader frame around this being a lawless and out of control administration.
So hopefully we won't have a nuclear crisis. We won't have missiles streaming in or out of this country. We won't have a showdown that threatens to go nuclear. So short of that, since this is the issue that we're mostly concerned about at Ploughshares Fund, does this present as a budget issue for you? Is this an area of opposing the military budget, opposing the nuclear budget? How does this work?
So that's something that we are on the record and we are mobilizing folks around. There's just no reason that a Democratic House should be increasing the military budget right now, given the constraints that this administration is placing on everything else. We should be funding more for diplomacy and less for the Defense Department. And so that is something that we are pushing around. I think what we experience in terms of sort of that as a grassroots issue is there is a determined constituency that pays attention to it. But we really do have work to do in terms of making it a national headline issue.
So the president is coming out with a $750 billion request. That's what he's asked Congress for, a giant jump from last year's appropriations. The Democrats countered with $733 billion.
Right.
Also a giant jump from last year's budget. How did you respond? Did you support the Democratic alternative?
We are opposed to it. We think that Democrats should be, at a minimum, not increasing the defense funding accounts. And I think that this is really an example of Democrats still playing by an old set of rules.
Yes.
They're scared of looking soft on defense. They're scared of what sort of the reasonable moderates say, and they don't really notice that the ground has shifted dramatically. The other side is no longer playing by that same set of rules, and so trying to look reasonable doesn't score you any points
I
anymore.
can't tell you how many Democrats I talk to and say that we can't look weak on defense, and so they support these huge budgets. And in part, this Democratic bill was designed to increase domestic spending. So they said, yes, we'll go to 733, but you also have to increase the domestic side. That budget proposal was pulled. They couldn't get enough Democratic support for it. I think it was mainly from the progressives, but you might be more involved. Tell me what happened.
The progressives were actively involved in blocking this as a strategy and having the resolution pulled.
So when the Democrats had to pull the bill, is that a sign of what you're talking about, the ground shifting, or is this actively a result of your organizing and other progressives organizing to get the party to move to those positions?
Well, I think you can never attribute these things to a single factor on its own, right? I think that there is there's a new energy and a new level of strategy and organization coming from the Congressional Progressive Caucus under the leadership of Representative Jayapal. They have done an enormous amount of internal organizing work to get to this point. There's certainly been a grassroots push, and I think there's a new spirit sort of throughout a lot of the grassroots that's about, recognizing that there's not a lot of sense in preemptively conceding these arguments. If we actually have a position, maybe we ultimately get to a compromise that is still not what we would have liked, but there's no point in compromising before we even get on or start having a conversation with the other side.
Great, thank you very much. And the Progressive Caucus, do you have a relationship with them? This has always been a relatively weak organization until the last election, and now I think there's 100 members, and they're hiring staff, they're moving. What's your relationship with them? How do you interface with them?
Well, so we work with them quite a bit. We actually hosted immediately after the election an orientation for the new members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, co-hosted with the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. And so we work with them. We try to make sure that Indivisible groups nationwide are supporting the work of their members who are in the caucus. And when there is a negotiating strategy that involves the caucus, we try to work to support it. And so that's what the work on the budget fight has looked like. And we look forward to continuing to coordinate with them across the board going forward.
I noticed that you served as the policy director for Tom Perriello when he was running for governor of Virginia, that you worked on the Hill for him, that you also served as an advisor to the State Department's quadrennial diplomacy and development review process. In the Time magazine section on you, they had others write the sort of description, and yours was written by the newly elected representative Ayanna Pressley, who wrote, "Last year could have been defined by fear for many Americans, but because of the tireless efforts of activists and organizers like Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin and thousands of others, it was defined by hope." That, I wish somebody would write something like that for me. How did you feel about being selected? Was this a surprise?
Well, it was a surprise. So it's actually really interesting. They tell you that you're going to be on the list, but they don't tell you who is writing the description or let you review it or anything like that. So we were sort of in the dark as to what it was actually going to say about us and who was going to be the writer. And so we were obviously just thrilled and honored by Representative Presley's write-up. I think it's a weird experience to be on a list like that, knowing that you're a stand-in and a representative for so many people who have been working so hard for years to make this possible.
And has it changed anything for you? Did you go to the dinner, the 100 most influential person dinner?
We did. Yes, that was last week.
I saw the video of that. I didn't see you there though, but tell me.
We went. It was, it was the first black tie gala I think I've ever actually been to, so that was very exciting.
Well, that's an impressive place to start.
Yeah. And I think that we tried to act cool around all the very famous people. There's a very funny deflating moment when you arrive at the gala, which is that it's the location's public, the event is public. There's a big horde of teenage girls who are right outside of it, behind a barricade, and they're all like ready with their signs to like check if you're Taylor Swift or The Rock, and they kind of like check you out, and they're like, you're not The Rock, and
right,
so they
both
just
of whom
ignore
were
you.
On the list, as was Michelle Obama and many others. This was a massive affair. So you arrive, and what happens?
Well, so you arrive, you get out of the car, and like 100 people look at you, and they're like, you're not interested.
Yeah, you must be staff. Yeah.
So then, which keeps your ego in check a little bit.
That's great.
But no, it was a fun night. We ended up finding sort of the other organizers and activists mostly, and strategizing with them throughout the night.
Yeah, you were nominated in the Pioneer section.
We were.
That's great. Yeah. Well, others should go take a look at the ceremony, but mainly the issue. It's at time.com. This is great. We're going to close here in just a second, but I'd like to ask you what you see for the future of Indivisible. How do you see this playing out? Well, I guess for the rest of the election cycle, is that how you sort of score your strategy? You look through at election cycles. Tell me what's going to happen.
I would say we are looking a little bit farther over the horizon at this point. So, we have this overarching analysis, right, which is that Donald Trump's election was not an aberration. It was a symptom of a bigger problem, and that's about our democracy. It's about the health of our representative government. It's about polarization. It's about sort of the trends in government that could produce a Donald Trump. And so for us, the long-term strategy is not just beating Donald Trump, although that is absolutely our top priority and that is a centrally important thing, but it's also about reforming our democracy in a way where the next Donald Trump is not possible. And that's about making our democracy actually representative, actually reflective of the people. It's everything from voting rights to making our institutions function by getting rid of things like the filibuster, to taking on the sort of the absurd Republican packing of the courts. We think that there is going to be a major lift for the next Democratic president, who is hopefully taking office in 2021, to actually start to rework the rules and unrig the rules of our country in order to make sure that we actually have a reflective democracy. And we want to build the grassroots army that's there with them every step of the way.
When it comes to nuclear policy, we feel the same way, that you have to come in with a plan, that the next president should come into the White House with a plan for not just restoring the status quo before Trump, but a plan for looking forward to have a saner nuclear policy that cuts the number of weapons, that cuts the budget for these weapons, that changes doctrine. So do you have an overall plan? Are you developing a list of, okay, on day one, repeal these 100 presidential statements? Are you working on something like that? So there's a roadmap for the next president?
Well, funny story. We're writing a book. And the book is actually in part about this analysis about how democracy has gotten to where we are, and it's sort of the 2021 agenda for restoring, well, I hate to say restoring because it's not like democracy was functioning particularly well at any point in recent history.
Good point.
But for unrigging the rules around democracy. And so we're not trying to take on everything. We're not trying to be, the think tank with every answer for every issue, but we are trying to say here are these foundational things that we have to get right in order to create create the system that allows us to pass a bold progressive agenda across the board.
Right, so not just going back to where we were, but looking forward, unrigging the system.
Yes.
I did not know that that's what your book was about. Do you have a title? What's the working title?
Title is We Are Indivisible.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Leah. It's just been a thrill watching you progress, watching your organization explode under the scene. It is such a difference having Indivisible and groups like you out there in the political movements right now, reshaping what it means to participate in American democracy. I should let you know we're going to have Republicans come in on this podcast and defend what the administration's doing. We're going to have Republican analysts come in and defend. But it's great to be able to start off with your exciting, dynamic, progressive vision. If people want to know more about Indivisible, where should they go?
They can go to our website, indivisible.org.
And when's the book going to be on sale?
Fingers crossed, assuming we can finish the draft in the next few weeks, it'll be on sale in November.
You got to start plugging the book. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil and Megan McCall. Audio engineering by Derek Zender. Theme music is by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit Ploughshares.org.